Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, December 1st. Oh, I forgot to say Happy December in the Morning Post. Well, Happy December, everybody. We've I don't know. We've finally made it to this thing, which is December 2017. Congratulations. We've survived so far. Lots going on this morning, as always. Never a dull moment, I guess you could say. If you're really, really trying to stretch for a silver lining to the Trump era, you could say, well, there's never a dull moment. Of course, most of you will realize, well, you'd rather have it dull, for one thing, compared to this anyway, and remember the old Chinese proverb, which may or may not really be Chinese, may not really be a proverb. It probably just showed up in a fortune cookie, and we all mistook it for one, but proverb / curse, I guess, right? May you live in interesting times. Well, you do, and now you see what that was all about. Even if it was all BS, made up, and disguised as some sort of piece of Chinese wisdom. I don't know, maybe it is. In which case, thanks, China. We appreciate it. What are you going to say? Okay, well, here's what's going on this morning. I searching around for a theme, and usually I can look for that in Pocket, and on many days I can just turn to Skype and just let Greg Dworkin tell you what's really going on. Here's what's caught my eye this morning. I guess we'll definitely spend some time on this story. I saw a tweet from Soren Dayton. Now, Soren Dayton is someone I have a passing acquaintance with. As it turns out, he and I did a panel like a million years ago. I was trying to recall all of this earlier this morning. Did a panel something like, anyway, a million years ago. With, let's see, at the invitation of the Sunlight Foundation. And we were talking about transparency online, and transparency in general, and how the great online machine could make that more practicable, and ways we could help improve government and political transparency. And I think I made the focus of my part of the panel there a discussion about procedural transparency and how I thought we were overlooking this particular aspect of transparency. In other words, we had focused at that point on the data-driven focus, the ability of data-driven folks anyway on the internet, and there are a lot of them, to provide information, to move information that had currently, or at that point, been, rather closely held among lawmakers, those in Congress, their aides and staff, etc., and distribute it among we the people. Very important sounding, right? Everybody should have that information. It's true. And we were all working on that. Well, I wasn't working on that. Others were working on that. Many of you were working on that and moving that information from wherever it was being stored in the vaults of Congress to online so you could all have access to it. I was working on a more interesting problem to my view, which was I could tell you all about, I'll share all this information with you about what's going on in Congress. The point is that you won't be able to understand a great deal of it because it's written for its originally intended audience of Hill denizens. So, for instance, if we were to use the internet, use Twitter and other available resources to instantly share the information with you that your lawmakers are seeing, well, they're seeing that there's a bill on or there's a vote coming up on a motion to recommit on HR 2692 or whatever, and that's all that gets transmitted on the Hill. That's all they need. They know what they're talking about, or, well, they're supposed to know what they're talking about. They at least they have resources where they can look up what that bill is, but they usually know what it is because they get a little morning briefing. You can look it up too. It's an extra step. And I was saying, the part of the problem, has to be, we need a way to educate people to the fact that they can look this stuff up and find out what is HR 2692, what is a motion to recommit. And there was nobody working on that except me and There's no money in that, I can promise you. And anyway, it was an interesting discussion. The Sunlight Foundation put the two of us together. I don't recall exactly what Soren was aiming at. It was a long time ago. Not that it wasn't worth anything. But you know how it goes. Sometimes you get put on a panel with a guy. He's a conservative guy. He doesn't describe himself as such, say, in his Twitter bio. And that's the place where people who are really, truly nuts will make sure that you know that they're conservative by either adopting an eagle avatar without one of the pink hats on it, or, say that they love Jesus and they're a dad, or whatever, stuff like that. Well, he doesn't do that. Anyway, Soren, he was a nice enough guy, and this happens quite a lot when you get put on panels with conservative guys. They, if you do a good job, they find you interesting and say, it's nice to talk to you and get your views. I don't agree with you politically, but blah, blah, blah. And I usually say, okay, whatever. And I don't usually reciprocate. I'm not as good at that as more understanding people like, say, Greg Dworkin. But anyway, Soren tweeted this morning, and I think it was a good tweet. I don't rate it a 10, but it was a good tweet. And he tweeted out, turns out that Sean Hannity and Drudge Report ran Russian propaganda. Yikes. And it links to a story on NBC News. Russian trolls' graphic tweets on racism, rape, and Satanism revealed. NBC News uncovered graphic and offensive tweets sent by Russian trolls in an attempt to further divide an already divided nation. And nothing against Soren here, but I felt like I had to, make a couple comments on it. Now I have a radio show, so I'm definitely going to make some comments on this. I retweeted his tweet along with a comment. Yikes, yes. And maybe a little duh for good measure, just to cover the bases. Now he thinks that's a fair point, but still, he says, there's this issue. And there is this issue. And so I'd like to speak with you for just a moment about this issue. And I don't think I'm going to teach you anything about this. We're going to just commiserate here. But let's take a look at the story over at NBC News. Russian trolls pushed graphic, racist tweets to American voters. Ben Popkin is the writer, and it says right up at the top, warning, this story contains offensive content. Now, why does this story contain offensive content? Right at the outset, we should say the reason this story contains offensive content is that they are reporting on what Sean Hannity and the Drudge Report and, frankly, others, I don't know if they're mentioned in this report, they're telling you what they ran with, what they headlined their stories as, what kind of material they were covering. In other words, the offensive content is the content that was available during the campaign on the Drudge Report and Sean Hannity's Twitter feed. They're just telling you. Now, Sean Hannity and Drudge will surely tell you, I'm just telling you what I saw. And ultimately, the story, I guess, leads us to this, which is it's the Russians that came up with this offensive content. It's just that there was the editorial decision of the Drudge Report and Sean Hannity to say, let us feature this and write a complimentary headline to go with it, and this will be the content we serve to our audience. You and I knew that Drudge and Hannity were full of crap, and you've known that since forever. You and I have known since forever that they are offensively full of crap. You and I have known since forever that it was their business model to be full of crap. I don't know whether Soren is saying he didn't know that until now. I don't think that's the case. I think he's just saying, yikes, look how pervasive and how successful the Russians were in luring in people who should have, absent this whole Trump-Russia episode, would have, I think, been people you could have depended on to be anti-Russian in their outlook. But things have changed a little bit. So let's look at Ben Popkin's story, just so we know what we're talking about exactly here. A zealous band of Russian trolls flooded Twitter with hundreds of thousands of divisive posts in 2016, accusing Democrats of satanic practices and supporting rape in an attempt to influence the presidential election, according to a new analysis of a Twitter database by NBC News. The effort tricked thousands of users into spreading graphic racial epithets across social media, interweaving provocative content. Provocative content, ladies and gentlemen. Provocative content, that's what they call it. With disinformation and falsehoods. The tweets were uncovered in a database of more than 202,000 deleted Russian troll tweets that NBC News compiled from 3 sources familiar with Twitter's Application Programming Interface, or API, an online system that allows outside software developers to work with the data underlying users' tweets. Blah, all right, whatever. But okay, good explanation. Belongs in there. I gotcha. Yeah, if they left it out, my technical folks out there would be saying, why don't they explain exactly? And you're right. Good on you, Ben Popkin, because I'm too stupid to understand this stuff. Doesn't mean it doesn't belong in the story. It does. I should understand it. The set was created by cross-referencing. This is methodology reporting here. Good for you, Ben. The set was created by cross-referencing the list of 2,752 confirmed Russian trolls released by the House Intelligence Committee in October against recorded tweets held by the sources. It resulted in a database of tweets from more than 450 of the accounts operated by Russia's internet research agency, Troll Factory, sent from June 3rd, 2011 to August 26, 2017. All of the sources asked for anonymity to avoid being identified as possibly violating Twitter's developer policy. 2 of the sources asked not to be identified because they didn't want to become targets of Russian trolls themselves. Another problem. While Twitter has removed the tweets from public view, NBC News was able to cross-reference many of the tweets between the datasets and online archives. The resulting tweets represent a sampling of the total content produced by the trolls. According to Michael McFaul, who was the U.S. ambassador to Russia from 2012 to 2014 in the Obama administration, the provocative tweets are evidence of the Kremlin's campaign to support Donald Trump, damage Hillary Clinton, and disrupt conversation during the 2016 presidential race. The objective was to, quote, sow doubt and discord in America, McFaul said. That's part of a grander strategy of making everything relative. There is no truth. There is no democracy versus autocracy. Russians who literally invented the word disinformation or desinformatia to define the practice of spreading a deliberate lie in order to deceive, digitized their craft and injected it right into our election. Now, here's the section on satanic rituals. One of the memes boosted by the trolls tried to tie candidate Clinton to Satanism and the occult. You'll recognize it, but it's interesting to see it put in such stark terms, because that's exactly what happened, and it doesn't really hit you in the face until you see it reported this way, maybe. One of the memes boosted was trying to tie Clinton to Satanism, right? Besides the well-known Pizzagate hoax, the trolls stirred up rumors that Clinton and her campaign manager, John Podesta, attended a satanic ritual, a story that the fact-checking site Snopes has labeled false. And here, I might say, you'd be permitted, if I were the editor, a few more words to say, and also everybody in the whole effing world knew it was false, not just Snopes. But I know that's a source, and so you think you've covered a base, and you have, and it's good to include that. But I mean, I don't know. It's like the Nazi profile stories. You could take a moment to say, yeah, by the way, almost everybody in the world who's sane thinks this guy is off his rocker, and we might, it goes without saying, except not anymore. Now you actually have to say it. Otherwise, more idiots will think this is possible because they're teaching the controversy. That's another line we've had tied around our necks and now we have to live with. Anyway, okay, suffice to say then, and they just throw the Pizzagate thing in there like, oh, by the way, also Pizzagate, but here's the satanic ritual thing. You'll recognize it probably. You have to be a political junkie. I did learn this. Only the political junkies like you and me saw anything like this. If you're a regular person who generally gets their news, 5 or 10 minutes at a time during breaks on the radio station they listen to on the way to work, you never saw this, thank God. But the rest of us did. And of course, it filters into society in other ways, which is a problem. Okay, so besides Pizzagate, and besides this thing that Snopes plus the world labeled false, there was this. The rumors began after WikiLeaks, amazing, obtained and began publishing emails hacked from Podesta's personal Gmail account. In one of the emails, Podesta's brother, who we all hate or something, right? You remember that? This is Tony Podesta. Remember, we're all supposed to be, I think it's Tony. I don't know how many brothers he has. Tony Podesta, we're all supposed to be distraught because he, like Saul Alinsky, has been discredited or something, and everybody thinks that we live our lives based on anything anybody named Podesta says. Whatever. So, Podesta's brother asks if he will be attending a spirit cooking. You remember that? Spirit cooking dinner party thrown by the performance artist Marina Abramovich. I'm guessing that's Abramovich. It's a V-I-C with an accent mark over it. And I don't know the language that has that, but I think it's like, Eastern European Slavic, and usually you end up putting a vich on that. Am I right about that? Am I right, people? On November 14th, 2016, just days before the election, WikiLeaks directed followers to a blog post on a site that dug up videos from a 1996 surrealist spirit cooking installation by Abramovich that included phrases such as, "With a sharp knife cut deeply into the middle finger of your left hand, eat the pain." All of which was apparently written in pig's blood on the gallery wall. Now, I'm not a big fan of performance art or weird art, by which I mean art, essentially. I don't know what I'm talking about art. I don't mean to offend anybody, but I'm not an artist. I'm not real good at art appreciation. I never gave it a chance. So I don't know. Maybe there's some value to this somewhere. Maybe it's just the nuance of it. I can intellectually, I can picture somewhere that there's an argument for this stuff. I don't care for it. I don't spend my time on good art either. And by which I mean stuff that is non-controversial. And so therefore maybe not art at all, but I don't even visit galleries to view the masters. I know nothing about art. But this sounds kind of crazy. Okay, sure. So, I don't know what the hell that's supposed to mean. Anyway, cut into the middle finger of your left hand and eat the pain. Okay, is this supposed to be edgy? I have no idea. And you know what? If the alt-right people painted that in pig's blood on the wall, they'd think that was, I'm an edgelord, man. I don't even know what that means. Who cares? By the way, it's written in pig's blood, which is anti-Sharia, so this should be a good thing, right? I don't know. I don't know why they don't like this one. Abramovich later said that John Podesta didn't attend the dinner, which she held to thank her Kickstarter contributors. We need to raise taxes on those guys. And that the event involved cooking traditional soups at her apartment, which, as events go, I'm also not interested in that. I guess I'll just say, I don't care for the art world, and so therefore I don't want to cook traditional soups. I don't want to cook traditional soups at anybody's apartment. I want to go home. If you're going to have traditional soup, let's get it. Let's make it. Whatever. Okay. I'm sure, though, if you're a big fan of the artist, then it's a big thrill to cook traditional soups at her place and chat with her. I've never been into that kind of stuff, though I do like soup. So we have that in common. The verbatim tweets sent by confirmed Russian trolls on the list released by the House Intelligence Committee show an effort to amplify the satanic narrative. Here's one such tweet. Breaking. Clinton Foundation paid occult spirit cooking priestess $10,000 for operational support. Tweeted Russian troll World News Polly, P-O-L-I, like political, World News Polly on November 5th. All right. Obvious BS, right? You and I see immediately, okay, this is one of those idiotic troll people that we can see through from a mile away. Here's another one. Retweeting Makada, whatever that's supposed to mean. Underscore MAKAD underscore. Who knows? Should I spend time explaining it? No. WikiLeaks. Clinton campaign chair John Podesta attended satanic cooking spirit cooking ritual. Hashtag spirit cooking. Tweeted Russian troll Nick Luna one day before. Now, you may have seen the hashtag and how it became a hashtag, and that might be how you saw it, and everybody laughed at it as idiotic at the time. But here we are studying it judiciously, as we will, a year later. And troll John Larson tweeted, he's retweeting somebody named Kevin Anth. I liked a YouTube video from Mark Dice, then the URL, Hillary Clinton spirit cooking satanic ritual. Now, again, just to remind everybody, John Podesta did not attend this thing. All that happened was, I guess his brother asked him, are you going to attend this thing? And he didn't attend this thing. But from there, Hillary Clinton is a witch. All right, duh. Whatever. Now, this stupid stuff, and by the way, I guess you should take a moment to realize that, once again, the Russian trolls don't say, my name is Boris, my name is Natasha, whatever. They're either goofy fake names like Kagro X or Makata, or they're Nick Luna, John Larson, Kevin Anth, or whatever. They all have American sounding names. You're supposed to believe that they're just regular Americans like you who happen to believe that Hillary Clinton is a witch because John Podesta got an email from his brother that asked if he was going to a soup party, therefore Hitler, socialism, witchcraft, right? So what happens next? Next in the article, anyway, is embedded a Sean Hannity tweet. Leaked email, he screams in all caps, appears to link Clinton campaign chairman to bizarre occult ritual. And then a link, and who knows to which one of these things it goes to. And I'm sure over at Sean Hannity World Headquarters, the legal people are like, yeah, so what? We told them how to hedge that thing. Leaked email appears to link. And so now we're in the clear. If we said leaked email shows Hillary Clinton is a witch, we got a problem, except that Hillary Clinton is never going to bother suing Sean Hannity over something like this. If it was the other way around, Sean Hannity would absolutely be suing. Donald Trump would absolutely be suing. But we don't waste our time with that stuff. Sean Hannity, though, he's bulletproof now, appears to link. Wink, wink, you should all tweet this around. He knows what's going to happen with this. The story was boosted by Russian trolls and conservative websites, including The Drudge Report and Fox News host Sean Hannity's website and Twitter feed, spinning it into a tale of devil worship and a bizarre blood feast. Here is the story, or the screen cap of the story as it appeared on The Drudge Report. A photo of God only knows what. It's a picture, like a horribly cropped picture of Hillary Clinton. What's happening here is she's walking on stage somewhere, and there are, I guess, people up in the balcony to whom she's, extending a hand and acknowledging their presence as she receives the applause of the crowd. But the way the picture is cropped, you'll see that, she's got her hand in the air and fingers spread. And so with this headline that runs underneath it, you're supposed to think something different is going on here. The headline, all capital letters, because that's the way Drudge does it. All caps, all bold, all underlined. WikiLeaks, like WikiLeaks. Wiki-Wiccan. Get it? Wiki-Wiccan. Podesta practices occult magic. FBI agents see, scare quotes, Antichrist. Come on. I mean, look at how far they're stretching those. Wiki-Wiccan. Podesta practices occult magic. No, Tony Podesta asked his brother if he was going to a soup party. FBI agents see Antichrist. Well, I see Jesus in my toast. That doesn't mean I belong in the headlines. Well, maybe it does. Within hours, hashtag spirit cooking was trending on Twitter. We know well from cognitive science, the article continues with a quote here. We know well from cognitive science that once you've read something, especially if it's framed as news, and that is the business model, by the way, I'm interjecting here, of Drudge Report and Sean Hannity, to frame crap as news. That's the point of it. I wear a suit. I go on a Fox News channel, and I say absolute BS. But I do it in a suit, and I got a chyron beneath me, and I got one of those screens behind me that puts evil people's pictures up as I talk about them. I'm news. We know well from cognitive science that once you've read something, especially if it's framed as news, it's difficult to discount as fake, even if you've been told it's fake. Jeff Hancock, a communications professor at Stanford University and founding director of the Stanford Social Media Lab, told NBC News. Nobody had to tell NBC News that. They know very well, by the way, because they're actually in the news business, the business of framing stuff as news, although hopefully things that are really news as opposed to Podesta practices occult magic and the FBI sees an antichrist. But they use the same methodology. But okay, you know how the news game goes. In order to make this statement, we need a expert opinion to make it sound like we researched something, and we did, so we might as well take credit for it. And when individuals already agree with the premise of the falsehood, the article continues, for instance, that Hillary Clinton isn't trustworthy, I mean, that's a premise that's out there, I know, but I mean, is that really the premise for John Podesta is a warlock and he eats blood and he's the Antichrist, according to the FBI? Can that really be said to be the premise of it? Not really, but they just stretch everything that they can. Okay, so when individuals already agree with the premise of the falsehood, for instance, that Hillary Clinton isn't trustworthy, ignoring outright lies becomes even more difficult, he said. Our default is truth, Hancock said. We have to work hard on disbelieving. Well, it's easier now to disbelieve lots of things that are happening in the world, I guess. And that's the value of this kind of reporting. We are coming up on our first break, believe it or not, and we ain't yet near done, so we'll continue with this. There's much more to this story. It's not a terribly long story, but I think it's a terribly important story, and I have some more commentary to add on these things. We'll catch up, though, with other things that are happening, flying by on Twitter, happening in the news, comments that are coming in from you on the KITM hashtag. That's how you can make comments on and possibly even redirect the show while we are in progress. We'll be back after this quick 2-minute break. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Good morning and welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. Oh, by the way, Ben Popkin, the author of the story, is tweeting back at me. I wish I could integrate that in. If I was smart and or had a dedicated producer, which is, by the way, something that we need money to do, right? Like if I had a studio and a producer and a team and everything, they would now be tweeting to Ben Popkin and saying, do you have Skype? Will you get on the phone? Or I would have phone lines too. Will you get on the phone with David on the air and discuss your story? And that would be awesome to do. But I can't do that. And the reason is, I guess I could do that, but then it would be 10 minutes of me telling you what I'm typing. And that doesn't make for compelling radio, I don't think. But if it were just a podcast, I guess I could do this. Anyway, the point is, he's out there, he's saying things in defense of his article. And, if I could type this at the same time as I was speaking, I would say, don't panic, Ben. I don't think you're panicking, but, it was a good article. It's good. I'm sharing it now. But he's reacting to the fact that I said, at the end of my short tweet storm about it this morning, which I'm sort of explaining to you now live. He's reacting to one of the tweets and it said, I'd say the story is shame on a thankfully small but still powerfully stupid segment of Americans. Oh, wait, this is actually a portion which I'd like to reveal afterwards too. to sum things up. Let me continue with this article rather than blow the order in which I meant to present this to you. This next section meant to illustrate the point he made up at the top that they were sharing memes and fake news about Democrats supporting rape. We're getting onto the rape section. Off the Satanism and onto the rape. Are you ready? Another effort made by the trolls was to tie Democrats and liberals to support of rape. Over 460 of the tweets contained the word rape or a variation like rape-fugees. Do you remember that? So combining Democratic support for rape plus also overwhelming our country with illegal immigrants and refugees and probably terrorists. That was the idea. For instance, the prolific Russian troll account 10GOP, we've mentioned them on the air before, tweeted just 2 days after nice attack. Hashtag, nice attack. Nice. I was like, what the hell is that? Nice attack, buddy. Nice, France. Yes, I don't remember every stupid hashtag. Or frankly, every terrorist attack that happens anywhere, whether it's here or abroad. There are too many of them, and that's really part of the problem. Anyway, just 2 days after Nice attack, stupid liberals welcome hashtag rapefugees. How stupid? Hashtag RNC in CLE. That on July 17th, 2016. Here's a tweet from who knows who. Here are the people involved. Wired Terrier and The Patriot 143. Big whoop. Women who vote Hillary are telling their daughters rape is okay and they will be slandered on top of it, tweeted Russian troll Emily Warren, another super Russian name, on October 15th, 2016. Though it is spelled in a funky way, so we're meant to believe that maybe it's a millennial. Emilee, Emily. At another point during the campaign, one troll account replied to another user's tweet about Donald Trump's relationship with his oldest daughter, Ivanka, twisting it to make it a lewd reference to one of President Barack Obama's daughters. I don't recall that tweet, but okay, I can believe them doing that. Next section, racism. The Russian trolls also incorporated racist slurs, themes, and topics into their messages. One line of attack again distorted an element from one of Podesta's stolen emails. Clinton had forwarded an Israeli op-ed article about a Muslim man left to die on the side of the road. The original author referred to how the authorities might have thought of the man as a sand N-word. You can put that together for yourself, right? A cropped screen grab was taken out of context and reframed to say Clinton was referring to Muslims using the epithet and then spun up through Twitter through the Russian troll accounts. Here's a tweet involving Obama bash being retweeted here. Obama bash saying, never hashtag Hillary because. Now, what is that supposed to be? Was it Hillary because? Or was there a hashtag never Hillary? That I believe. I guess probably they were trying to swamp the hashtag Hillary because, which was being used earnestly by Hillary supporters. Never hashtag Hillary because. While calling Trump a racist in a leaked email, she referred to a Muslim man as a sand N-word, tweeted Hydrox on October 15th, 2016, a few days after the second presidential debate. Snopes reported that the claim circulating on social media that Clinton had used the derogatory term was false. Some of the accounts also weighed in heavily on racially charged topics like the protests in Ferguson, Missouri in the summer of 2014 after the death of an unarmed black teenager, Michael Brown, at the hands of a white police officer, whom the grand jury later declined to indict on any charges. You know all about that. I probably could have skipped that. I should just say Ferguson. Yes? All of these protesters in Ferguson, your hand are covered with blood, hashtags cops will be cops, and hashtag Ferguson shooting, tweeted Russian troll, I don't even know what that's supposed to mean, Russian troll Eva Green 69 on March 15th, 2015. Well, they got the American part of that one right. Another tweet by a Russian troll account, Stay Woke 88, they were not completely out of touch all the time, these Russian trolls. Some of them were better than others. So, I mean, picking up on Stay Woke 88 as as a Twitter name to try to fool people into thinking that you are a Black Lives Matter activist. Frankly, that would work a lot better. I'm guessing on white people than black people. Like, I don't know. I don't know if they would have been fooled by really, your handle is stay woke. That's usually a tip that there's a white person trying to look like they're hip to black issues that way, but I don't know. I don't know what 88 means. Oh, yes, I do. What am I talking about? It could mean anything. I mean, honestly, 88 is a number, but I forget. Yeah, that's a Hitler thing. So I guess I should have, well, I guess then even white people would be like, now, is that really a black person's, would they use the 88? I don't know. Anyway, another tweet by Russian troll account Stay Woke 88 that pretended to be a Black Lives Matter protester took the most infamous white nationalist slogan and tweaked it to make it appear to be a pro-black statement. What are we talking about here? And I guess here, is this the tweet? Is that what it is? We must secure the existence of our people and a future for black children. See? Okay, I gotcha. Anyway, experts, oh, by the way, the face of the person in the profile, the name of the person supposedly behind the handle StayWoke88 is supposed to be Thomas Lopez. Now, not Tomas Lopez, but Thomas, T-H. So here's where we begin to run into, they get into gray areas and they don't really understand exactly what they're dealing with. But I'm sure there is a Thomas T.H. Lopez out there. But this Thomas Lopez is supposed to be a black, it looks like a woman possibly even with, long braids. It's not dreadlocks, but long braids. But the face in the profile is blurred out. And the reason is, it says right here in the caption of the picture, this is a screen grab of the retweet posted by the Russian troll, which references da-da-da-da-da. Okay, and it says the face has been blurred because former Russian trolls said they stole this online profile photo for their avatar. It's somebody who has nothing to do with this. They stole it from who knows where, and what kind of innocent people might be getting smeared with being Russian trolls if they just leave it alone. That's another aspect of what they were doing. And, I mean, but if it is a picture of a woman, putting that in as the avatar for Thomas Lopez probably makes very little sense. Although people do weird things with their avatars, all the time. So that's not terribly surprising. But yeah, that doesn't really reach like in love with Shape of Texas levels of disconnect with common English street lingo. But okay. Experts said the topics were deliberately chosen to exploit long-simmering differences in American culture. And they were. And they were actually relatively good at that. I mean, it doesn't take a great level of sophistication for an American anyway to understand it. But yet, most Americans don't have that understanding because they were fooled by it. But, the Russians were surprisingly in touch with what was dividing us. Although I think they've been studying it for a long time. And it's been the case since the Soviet era that they had good reason to believe that racial divides were exploitable in this country. They just didn't have the resources to do it. Anyway, the point of disinformation operations is not to create new rifts in society. It's to drive the rifts that are there further apart, said Graham Brookie, deputy director of the Digital Forensic Research Lab at the Atlantic Council, a Washington-based international relations think tank. Next section, election year distortions. According to reports of leaked internal documents from the Internet Research Agency, trolls were given specific topics and talking points and assigned daily quotas. By insinuating themselves into different niche online dialogues during the 2016 presidential race and pushing the conversational boundaries, the Russian trolls signaled to others in the conversation that it was acceptable to make more extreme statements. Permission structures. Even if they're not going to say Hillary Clinton is responsible for hashtag Pizzagate, it lowers the barrier of cost to say, lock her up, Brookie said. That's a very useful output for someone who wants to sow chaos in a democratic institution. I agree. Well quoted there, Ben. And even if readers rejected the outlandish statements, the trolls still grabbed their attention. For the Russian propagandists, that in itself was a win. In the end, the troll strategy was an export of methods Russia has used for years domestically to get citizens to see themselves not as part of a nation, but as members of smaller ethnic and identity-based groups and play all sides against each other. They want us fighting among ourselves, says McFall, the former ambassador. Then we're distracted. We're not talking about Syria. We're not talking about American leadership. We're questioning whether democracy will survive. We're less of a player internationally, and that's good for Russia. Yeah, absolutely true. And there's a video embedded here from NBC News inside one of Russia's factory of lies. It's just a short clip, but probably pretty informative. Now let me flip over here to the Twitter feed and to my own summation, I guess, of what this seemed to be all about for me. So I started off by saying to Soren Dayton, yikes, yes, and maybe a little duh just for good measure, and continued on then in saying, then linking directly to this story myself, saying, look at the stories that they're talking about here. And that's what we just did. Read their headlines. The news here isn't that Hannity and Drudge routinely run, and then I lapse into my own all caps ranting, completely insane BS, and anyone who believed it was a moronic a-hole. That's true, but it's not news. The news aspect of it is, of course, that they cribbed this BS from the Russians. Now, Ben takes some exception with that in a minute. I then continue to say, so I'd say the story is, shame on that thankfully small but still powerfully stupid segment of Americans forever buying into this crap, let alone, point number 2, journalists letting it, quote, rule their world. Oh, and also it came from Russia. Now we're on to a bigger issue here. The Drudge Report was among many outlets, the many outlets running with this stuff. Sean Hannity ran it. The Drudge Report ran it. The Drudge Report, we learned a few short years ago, it's now like a decade ago, rules the world of journalists. Remember when that was the case? I don't think it's still the case, but you remember when our politics was defined by people who said that Drudge ruled their world? I wanted to take a moment to remind you of who said that in case you either A, forgot, or B, didn't read me saying it this morning on Twitter. That was Mark Halperin, the now disgraced sexual abuser, Mark Halperin, who hopefully we never have to hear from again. And I think we knew even at the time that there were lots of journalists who were like, well, Mark Halperin doesn't speak for me. Drudge doesn't rule my world. But Drudge did rule a lot of the world, and it ruled the world of the guy who ruled how ABC News would cover the world for a long time. And that's pretty disturbing, particularly now that we know, as I tweeted this morning, and it is a morning show, that now we know what Mark Halperin was doing with his other hand while the first one was busy refreshing the Drudge Report and telling you, with the authority of ABC News behind him and the suit that he was wearing, that this was news, that the Drudge Report was the source of real stuff that you really honestly ought to be paying attention to if you wanted to pay attention to politics in the United States. And what were they saying? Podesta is a witch. He's a warlock. Hillary's a witch. The FBI thinks they're the Antichrist. And you were supposed to lap that up as news while Mark Halperin was raping everybody in sight, but that's what you were supposed to be doing. He really believed that. That's a serious thing. We got to think about that. Now I guess I should turn to Ben Popkin, who has tweeted back to me as I was explaining about the rule your world stuff. People who study, he says, the Russian troll propaganda say the story is a little more complex than I was saying. I was saying, look, the story here isn't that it was crap, it's that it was Russian. Well, he says it's more complex. It's not just the initial impact of whether you believed, retweeted, or even saw the hoaxes and disinformation. It's the poison's ripple effects, including demoralization and destabilization. That's true, although I have not had the opportunity to say that to him yet. And then he also further says, and there were more examples in our data set that show how specific disinformation storylines were boosted by the known Russian troll accounts, rose through the digital ecosystem, and were reamplified through places like InfoWars, Hannity, Drudge, and the like. To which now I just say, yeah, I know. That's what I thought you were saying. But okay. Nothing terrible there, but it might have been interesting, say, if we had a whole full-blown studio in operation. At that point, I would have jumped at it and snapped at somebody during a commercial break and said, get in touch with Ben Popkin and ask him if he wants to get on the phone and we can discuss this a little bit. And the segment would have been that much more interesting. Which brings me to the fact that, yes, I am bothering you on the live stream now these days with calls for donations, although I would guess that my most loyal donor supporters are those of you who are listening live on the live stream. And so maybe I've saturated that market. But anyway, I thought it might be a good idea to include a friendly reminder there during the breaks. But I want to swap out one of these things at some point. Maybe I think we do it twice now. But yeah, it's our intention. And at the suggestion of Scott Anderson, who suggested this too, by the way. But his other suggestion was, you don't want every break to be like, oh, please give us money. One of the breaks could be, oh yeah, by the way, you're important to us as contributors to the content of the show. Please, by all means, record your stories, send them to us. We'll play them on the air and interact with them and discuss them. And please contact us during the show and tell us what you want discussed and use the hashtag, all of that stuff. It's not just begging for money, but money would be nice. Anyway, yes, so lots going on here today, and lots of comment to the first stories. Let's see. Well, we'll catch up on this and what's happening in the Senate. By the time the show ends today, they are supposed to have restarted the vote-a-rama part of the vote on the reconciliation tax bill that they thought they were going to get to yesterday, but didn't because it sucks and they had problems with it because of how badly it sucked. We'll catch up on all of that. Let's see. Many comments. I want to go back to comments from yesterday post-show because they're relevant to what we're going to talk about here. Matthew, what do we got here? I have to take a close look. Matthew L. Rigdon. When people's handles run together and they have the middle initial in there, it's like, this guy's name is his name Matthew or is his name Matthew Rigdon? Well, it's probably Matthew L. Rigdon. Hi, Matt. He had some good observations here. He says this, about the tax bill, which we'll explain in a minute. You and Greg keep wondering why Republicans are pushing this tax bill, but why not? If there is a blue wave coming and they lose next November, tax bill or no, is the resistance going to vote for Republicans if they kill this bill? No, of course not. That's absolutely correct and a great point. Plus, there's no way for Dems to get to 60 seats in the Senate next year. Probably not. So the tax cuts are safe until 2020 at the earliest. Aren't Republicans just gambling that by 2020, the resistance will lose interest and they can still keep what they hold in the Senate? And the answer is, those are very good observations and probably quite right. That's true. I think Greg and I keep wondering why Republicans are pushing this tax bill mostly along the lines of, well, it's really a more traditional, and maybe it's outdated, political analysis. Why would you vote for something that is so terribly unpopular and that people will hate you for voting for? And the answer is either you don't care or you're very dumb. And sometimes it's a combination of both. But a better explanation of you don't care is what's offered by Matthew here, I think. Why wouldn't you care? Because the tax cuts themselves are probably pretty bulletproof, and some of you will actually survive if, hanging around in this swamp is what you're after. then, great, here's your reward. But more to the point, you're all usually speaking, generally speaking, in the Congress and in the Senate in particular, wealthy individuals, and you're going to be able to pocket a huge amount of money, a giant windfall to you. So great. Let's see. I think I'm missing some breaking news of, am I missing news that Mike Flynn is being formally indicted? Let's see. Breaking. Michael Flynn to plead guilty as charged to making these false statements to the FBI. Okay, I guess I better click through and check out what's going on here. The Washington Post has the story. Michael Flynn charged with making false statements to the FBI. That's not news, I guess, but the plan to plead guilty is, and that's interesting and feeds into the whole has he flipped story and will he give up Trump. Josh Dawsey broke this one post beginning of the show, I guess, 9:34 a.m. Former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn was charged Friday. So I guess the charge is new as well. With making, I guess we all knew he made false statements. Turning it into a charge is the news here. Making false statements to the FBI about who believes in an antichrist, apparently, about his contacts with Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak, marking another monumental development in the wide-ranging probe of Special Counsel Robert S. Mueller III, in case you were wondering. Flynn was expected to enter a plea at 10:30. According to the special counsel's office. The charge relates to false statements Flynn made to FBI on January 24th, 4 days after President Trump was inaugurated, about his meeting with Kislyak during the transition. Flynn is accused of making false statements to the FBI about asking the ambassador in late December to, quote, refrain from escalating the situation in response to sanctions that the United States has imposed against Russia that same day. Remember the ones that Trump said, oh, Putin's so smart for not doing it? Flynn set it up, I guess. And then he lied about it. Flynn also told authorities he did not recall the ambassador saying the Russians would moderate their response to Obama administration sanctions after the conversation. Separately, authorities say Flynn lied about asking the ambassador to delay a vote on the UN Security Council resolutions. So that's where we are. And I guess he's pleading guilty about it. And that is good news. It's difficult to cover as it breaks unless people just direct me to reports on it, which you're welcome to do, of course, using the hashtag KITM, so I have a chance to actually see it. Let's move on then from that and thank, again, Matt Rigdon for his comments. I think comments well taken. We wonder why they're doing this because we think of what they're doing typically as attempting to win re-election, and maybe that's just not it. And yes, also another good procedural point in that even passing these terrible, terrible tax cuts and losing all their seats, the opportunity to actually do something about reversing it is minimized at this point. And a good observation, and dangerous and upsetting as well. Let's see. What else have we got here? I'm not certain how to deal with this one here. So let's move ahead here. Rebecca Romans was trying to alert us to this a little while ago. Breaking from special counsel. The court has scheduled a plea hearing for Lieutenant General Michael T. Flynn at 10:30 a.m. So, but now we know that it is good news, and what's going to happen. Let's see. Canadian pundit Brian asking, "Am I a fan of Art Vandelay? Love the Seinfeld references." Warlock. Warlock. Are you a real warlock? Are you interested in the satanic soup party? Is that what this is all about? All right. Let's see. Can anyone name that French song played during break one? Serena, Peace Arena. Serena Peace Arena. That's really good. I like that. I never really noticed that until just now. Serena Blaze has to say about that one. Is that intentional rhyming? Serena Peace Arena? Like Peace Serena, Peace Arena. That's very good. Let's see. Jingy, what are you up to this morning? Oh, yes. Reminding me of the 88 equals HH, the eighth letter of the alphabet. Heil Hitler. Yes. Right. You are correct about that one. I remembered it was a Hitler something. Bill in Portland, Maine now asking, by the way, can we chant lock him up now? We can. Do we need to schedule something like that, or can you just do it at home? You know what? All of you could record yourselves doing it at home, send it to me, and I could probably now that'd be funny. The whole crowd does it, and I can edit it all together, and it'll sound like a large crowd of people chanting "Lock her up," I think, or "Lock him up." No, don't chant "Lock her up" unless you're talking about Kellyanne Conway, let's say, or Ivanka, or I don't think we have anything on Melania yet. But anyway, we can make our own chant, I guess. So lots of discussion about that one out there. Let's see. Right. Oh, Michael Musson also bringing us that news as well. Karen, let's see. Words and phrases I hope disappear. An ongoing list. Curated. Permission structure. No, come on. That makes a lot of sense, I think. And at the end of the day. Well, we'll talk about that at the end of the day. I guess we'll see whether it disappeared. Michael just sent me something. I am confused why the tax plan can even proceed in its current form. There we go. We got to get to that. How is a $1 trillion deficit using optimistic assumptions considered revenue neutral? And it's not, and it no longer matters. And this is something that was confuses everybody. It was confusing Armando last night. He wanted a counting of how this could come to pass. And perhaps that's where we should be moving along to. By the way, thank you, Bill, for sending me Daniel Dale's tweet. Flynn is the fourth member of Trump's campaign to be charged with a crime. He's the first who led a lock her up chant at the Republican convention. So, interesting observation. Absolutely well worth making. Let's see. We are coming up on our break number 2, the shorter of our breaks here. So, you won't have to wait long to hear us get to the subject of this stupid reconciliation tax bill and why it is that those of us who came to our understanding, or maybe those of you, I don't want to put it all on you guys, and make it seem like I always knew. This is confusing stuff. But those of us who came to our understanding of reconciliation in the modern era, the very modern era, during which time we were always told the things you couldn't do under reconciliation was things like increase the deficit, increase the debt, spend extra money. It was always supposed to be for deficit cutting and debt reduction. That was kind of sort of true, and I'll explain how it wasn't and why it isn't anymore after this. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Oh dear, am I seeing news that yet another pipeline spill? Oh no, it was the last of the Keystone pipeline spills in South Dakota. Charles Gaba retweeting news that says South Dakota warns it could revoke Keystone pipeline permit over oil spill. So I guess that's the latest development in there. I was trying during the break, I should have used one of the longer breaks, to type a reaction or an answer to Ben Popkin just to let him know that I thought, hey, the article's good, and don't freak out or anything. I don't think he is freaking out. He's I'm sure, a big boy and gets criticism all the time, and he can roll with it. Anyway, but I just wanted to tell him that, we were reacting more, I think, to the Twitter commentary on it than the article itself. And this is where you see that it would be valuable to have either a sidekick who could have spoken during my tweeting on that, or a producer that could have taken care of that messaging for me. All right, let's see. There's so much more to get to, but I think there's a lot of questions about what the hell with this tax bill, since they're about to vote on this thing, allegedly. Although I think we get to the Votorama part here, and nobody knows how long that could take. I think I've explained Votorama in the past. Don't know whether it would have been worthwhile for Democrats to come forward with 10,000 amendments. You know what? In this case, it probably would have made great sense to come forward with literally 10,000 amendments and just keep writing them as the debate goes on and insisting on a vote on them. And why not, given the fact that this bill hasn't been written yet? They're still not finished writing it, and that's ludicrous and absurd and a huge insult to the process. And yesterday was all about, what was really happening in the Senate yesterday was John McCain and all the other supposedly moderate and or sane, however you want to describe them, Republicans who either gave speeches or cheered speeches like the one that McCain gave, pans to regular order and the process. I mean, you remember he gave that big speech and everybody was like, what a hero he's not you guys probably, but everybody in the press, what a hero he is. And there were holdouts there too. Paint with a broad brush. If we don't paint with a broad brush, the painting's not going to get done. But there was so much commentary about it, what a hero he was in standing up for process. And it was great that he sank the Obamacare repeal thing, and fantastic. And I feel bad about being like, whoa, what have you done for me lately? But what have you done for me lately? Because you just gave this big speech a couple of months ago about the process has to be this, that, and the other thing. This bill had none of that. And you're like, I'm cool with it. And that was supposed to be separate from the issue of the content. But I guess the reality we all knew, and now it's on display. You were about the content, and you didn't like the health bill, and that's fine. I'm glad you didn't like the health bill. It sucked. This tax bill sucks worse. It's just good for you. And though people have been pointing out all day long that you're now undergoing cancer treatment, and this tax bill will destroy the availability of tax or of cancer treatment for millions of regular Americans. You're a wealthy individual. You're married to a wealthy individual. Cindy's going to get a huge tax cut. That means you'll get to enjoy it. So you're pro this thing. You're pro this terrible bill, despite the fact that this is the worst example of procedure ever. Really, quite honestly, this is one of the biggest, dumbest departures from regular order imaginable, and you're okay with it. So then don't give that big, stupid speech. But all right, you're a lying politician. Big deal. We've seen it before. Okay, so let's see. There's another write-up. If Greg were here, he would read you the Daily 202 and tell you that it's called the Daily 202 because 202 is the area code for Washington, D.C. And they have a big write-up of, under the headline, let's say, of this. In pursuit of a tax bill, Trump's GOP keeps violating more governing norms. They list for you, in other words, all of the reasons why this is a terrible bill, procedurally speaking. We have already gone over why it's a terrible bill, substantively speaking, but since they're rewriting it as we speak, there will be things we will have missed and things they will have added since we last talked about it. But yesterday, let's see. First, we should cover some of the drama that took place on the Senate floor yesterday. The Hill has a piece on that. GOP senators back motion on tax bill after holdup. At some point yesterday, this happened. Jourdain, I don't know whether she says Jourdain or just says Jordan Carney wrote this piece. Republican deficit hawks, yeah, right, held up a motion on the Senate tax plan for close to an hour before voting against sending the bill back to the Finance Committee. Somebody made a motion to recommit the bill to the Finance Committee, which is, of course, a huge joke because the bill was never, I don't think, committed to the Finance Committee in the first place. So it just should be a motion to commit, but I don't know, maybe they put some fingerprints on it on the way over here. I can't recall. Who cares? It was, substantively speaking, there were no hearings, no discussion of the bill, no markup, no voting on amendments. It just moved. Anyway, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and other GOP leaders huddled around Senators Jeff Flake, Bob Corker, and Ron Johnson on the Senate floor as Republicans discussed the tax bill. At one point, almost 20 senators were huddled around the Senate parliamentarian as she appeared to be explaining a document in her hand. After the vote was open for about an hour, Flake, Corker, and Johnson ended up voting against sending the bill back to committee. That would have been nice. The unprecedented floor drama came after the Joint Committee on Taxation said Thursday that projected economic growth under the bill would reduce revenue losses by $408 billion over 10 years, but the bill overall would still cost about $1 trillion. In other words, they said growth will pay for our tax cuts. And the expert analyst said, under the rosiest of scenarios, using your own style of dynamic scoring, which most people think is actually crap anyway, you actually erase about $408 billion of the $1.5 trillion that normal analysis says you're going to be removing from the budget, what you're going to be adding to the debt. Traditional analysis says $1.5 trillion. Dynamic scoring says $1.1 trillion, essentially. So that upset some people because they've spent their careers saying they were deficit hawks, and they were somewhat perturbed at finding out that they were not going to be able to say that anymore because they were salivating so hard for tax cuts for themselves, essentially, that they were going to have to abandon the principle of being a deficit hawk. And they were hemming and hawing about that. And eventually they said, hem wins. I'll take it. Senate Majority Whip John Cornyn said the discussions on the floor were focused on finding an alternative to the trigger concept backed by Corker, which would impose higher taxes if economic growth forecast under the bill fails to materialize, causing the deficit to skyrocket. In other words, because Corker was sticking to the myth of being a deficit hawk, he said, you know what, dynamic scoring might be bullcrap. And if it is, we should include this measure that says, if it turns out that dynamic scoring is stupid and it doesn't work, and we find ourselves looking at a $1.5 trillion increase in the debt instead of the $1.1 trillion that dynamic scoring would give us, then there should be automatic tax increases. And they said, all right, fine. The believers in dynamic scoring, I guess, were willing, interestingly, kind of, to put their money where their mouth is. Of course, they weren't putting any of their money there. They're taking your money to cover this bet. But they thought, all right, since we believe in dynamic scoring, we believe that we're going to end up being right and that your triggers will never end up being set off, so we'll include it. But the problem is that the Senate parliamentarian said, that's actually out of order in a reconciliation bill. These things can't be included. So they found out that wasn't going to fly. And then it was like, well, so are you going to vote for these tax cuts for yourself and your neighbors and friends and country club members? Or are you going to insist on being a deficit hawk? And he eventually said, all right, I'll let it go forward. So anyway, it doesn't look like the trigger is going to work. So we have an alternative, frankly. Tax increases we don't want to do, he said. So nothing happens, and they don't send the bill back. So anyway, that little hiccup, they got past. Now, last night, Armando was asking via Twitter, whatever happened to this whole thing? Does this mean, is the bird rule not a thing anymore? We were always given to understand, mostly because we only get our information kind of in passing from traditional media who sometimes understand it, sometimes don't. And they just kind of print whatever is in the explainers that they pick up, whether they get them from Vox or the Congressional Research Service or their own old articles or whatever. And we write things like reconciliation. Well, we write things even on the left here. We write things like reconciliation can only be used once a year. No, that's not true. It just usually is only used once a year. There's the kernel of truth that's behind that is that reconciliation can only be used once per fiscal year for each of the three to four existing permissible reasons to use reconciliation if there were instructions in a budget resolution for that year. P.S. unless they pass a second budget resolution and put some more instructions in there. From my explanations to you in the past of reconciliation, I think you can piece this together. You can't use reconciliation unless the budget resolution for that year says it's authorized and gives specific instructions for how it will be used. You can use it to increase the debt limit. You can use it to increase, taxes or change existing programs so that the costs are cut or that revenues are brought up so that you eliminate bits and pieces of the deficit or, if you're lucky, erase big chunks of it. But, there were limited purposes for which it can be used. And I guess just so we get it right, we can go to one of the explainer documents that's out there and read their language for it. But let's see. You can. I think there's a place where they tell you what the various permissible instructions are. I can't remember anymore off the top of my head what they are. But So you can. Let's see. You can give instructions regarding spending, revenue, or debt limit changes. Basically, the three, I think, basic issues. And so, I guess the point of telling you that there are three different things is to tell you you're supposed to be able to use it only once per fiscal year, provided there are instructions that say you can use it for this purpose. Once per year per purpose. Now, we usually do reconciliation bills as omnibus reconciliation bills. And so if there are instructions that require both spending changes and revenue changes, that is, spending and taxes, we tend to do them in one single bill. But you could, in other words, do 3 separate reconciliation bills in any one budget year if you were foolish enough to want to do something like that. You could do a reconciliation bill that cuts spending. You could do a reconciliation bill later on that raises taxes, or presumably, I guess you could, if you could cover it with offsetting spending cuts elsewhere, tax cuts. And that's why when they use them for tax cuts, they make an omnibus bill. The tax cuts should be partially offset under the old rules with mandatory spending cuts as well. And then, of course, you could do a third one if you wanted to that would raise the debt ceiling. But for some reason, they never do that. I don't really know why they don't use reconciliation for that, but they don't. That would relieve a lot of pressure and highlight the stupidity of having to do this all the time. Anyway, and that's only if they don't decide to just pass a second budget resolution during any calendar year. So the idea that you can only use reconciliation once per year, whether you're talking calendar year or fiscal year, is wrong, but it's not without basis, but it's just an improper understanding of things. And we might as well use that as an example of saying this is why none of what any of us understand about reconciliation, generally speaking, is right, and why we always find ourselves so confused. So, one of the other things we've frequently found ourselves understanding about reconciliation is that the Byrd rule controls everything with respect to reconciliation, and it really doesn't. It controls a lot of things, and it comes up a lot because people try to shoehorn dumb stuff into reconciliation because it's filibuster free. So they try to, do anything that the other side is going to object to under reconciliation. And they keep running into the Byrd rule because the Byrd rule says, among other things, one, you can't increase the debt or the deficit outside of the budget window, which in the Senate, where the Byrd rule is operative, in the Senate means 10-year budget window. As I recall, in the years past, I don't know if they've changed anything in the House, but the House used to do their budgets for 5 years, essentially. And the Senate did a 10-year budget. And there was a proposal at some point in the recent past to move that to a 20-year budget, which would have been interesting and troublesome, and probably should have taken it because it would be so troublesome for Republicans. Republicans are constantly having to sunset everything they want to do at 10 years because of the Byrd rule. The rule was the rule controlled backloading or prohibited backloading deficit exploding measures beyond the budget window. So you wouldn't have to show in your budget, I plan to explode the deficit. You could do it later and just say, and we're going to use reconciliation to do it, but you're not going to find out about it until it's too late. We didn't do any study on it or anything like that because it's outside the budget window. And the Byrd rule said, well, if you're not going to study what happens after 10 years with your bill, then you're not allowed to do anything that, if we can figure it out and show that it would explode the deficit outside the budget window, that's not permissible in the bill. And that came up a lot because Republicans tried to do dumb things under reconciliation, cut taxes, explode the deficit, etc. And reconciliation was a procedure under the Budget Act that was supposed to be used for the hard stuff of controlling the deficit. And that sometimes meant cutting things that were very popular, and maybe raising taxes as well, both of which were enormously unpopular and easy to filibuster because they were enormously unpopular. That's why they removed the filibuster, so that you could do the hard but right things with a majority vote. Anyway, there's another rule that came along later, the Conrad rule, which gets talked about a lot less these days. One of the reasons being it doesn't exist anymore. But it was the Conrad rule that prohibited reconciliation from, as it says here in this document from Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, it prohibited reconciliation from increasing deficits inside the budget window, or basically at all. But that would mean covering inside the budget window as well as outside the budget window. So if you were going to do something under reconciliation procedures that would increase the deficit, the Conrad rule said that's not what reconciliation is for. It's for cutting the deficit. If you want to increase the deficit, you're going to have to look elsewhere, and you're going to have to use regular order, and you're going to need the 60 votes. And that kept things under wraps for the most part, with doing anything super crazy under reconciliation. When did it happen? Under Democrats. In 2007, the Senate ends up adopting the Conrad rule and operating that way at a handicap under Democratic rule in the Senate. Now, that was very restrictive, and pretty soon the Republicans took over, and they realized, you know what sucks? Not being able to use a filibuster-proof reconciliation procedure to do the stuff we want to do, which explodes the deficit, like cut taxes. How did the Republicans use reconciliation for the 2001 and 2003 tax cuts, the Bush tax cuts, given that we all understand that reconciliation is only supposed to be used for reducing the deficit? The answer is, at that time, it wasn't against the rules. You could do whatever you wanted with revenues and spending, so long as the budget resolution instructed you to do it. Now, Democrats, as it happens, would never ask their committees to do anything that exploded the hell out of the deficit uncontrollably with reconciliation. But Republicans do, because everyone's generalized understanding of Republicans being fiscally responsible and Democrats being tax and spend is backwards and wrong, and intentionally so. Republicans love to tell you that. It's not true. Just like Hillary Clinton isn't a witch and the FBI didn't think John Podesta was the Antichrist, this also isn't true. But Russians didn't tell us that, so there's no story on it. So anyway, basically, that's what happened. And in 2015, when Republicans realized, oh, we want to explode the deficit again because we now control the Senate, and we think we might have a shot at winning the White House in 2016, they repealed the Conrad rule. Where did they repeal the Conrad rule? They repealed the Conrad rule in their budget resolution, which, as you'll recall from your knowledge of the Budget Act, is also filibuster proof. Budget resolutions can't be filibustered because they're statutorily time limited. Guess what? Therefore, you don't need 60 votes to repeal the rule that says reconciliation can only be used to lower the deficit. Wow. What a surprise. So they did it. They changed the rule in 2015. And now we're back to a situation where the Republican passed budget resolution issues instructions to use reconciliation to raise the debt by $1.5 trillion. Basically, the thing we all came up believing reconciliation was designed to prevent was now not legal, but allowable under the rules again. So that's where we are. One of the things we need to understand is all stuff that prohibits us from raising the debt and deficit under reconciliation is not the Byrd rule. Part of it is the Conrad rule. But never mind that, because the Conrad rule was just erased. So you've just learned about it. Now erase it from your memory because it doesn't exist anymore. So that's where we stand with this. That's how you can use reconciliation to raise the deficit. Republicans said, we want to. So they did. And they did it with 50 votes by putting it in the budget resolution. And remember that the Conrad rule is a Senate rule, not like the Byrd rule, a statute. So you can change that under the rules in the budget resolution, which has no legal force of law, doesn't have to be signed by the president, for one thing. Wouldn't have been signed by the president because it was in the 2015 budget resolution. And what I mean by that, the budget resolution is never signed by the president. But in 2015, if you had passed a regular law, if you had for some reason gone with the bill to repeal a Senate rule, which wouldn't make any sense, that would probably be something Barack Obama would have vetoed because it's stupid and he was still the president. But it didn't matter because he didn't have to touch it. Does that confuse the issue? Probably. All right. Anyway, by the way, there's another rule looming out there, which is only now coming into focus. People are beginning to write about it in the traditional media, although the blogs have been on it for some time. Perhaps you have seen it and maybe you understood it, maybe you didn't. But you might have seen in passing that when people make the accusation, for instance, that this tax bill makes huge or requires huge slashes in the Medicare, Medicaid budgets, and possibly even Social Security as well. But basically, the safety net would be slashed to ribbons under this tax bill. It's not directly in the tax bill. There aren't provisions in this thing that slash the safety net directly. So Republicans will say, it's a big lie. You're all lying liars who lie about this stuff. Where this comes from, if I understand this correctly, and there's always a question mark here, is there are other Senate rules that still govern what you can and can't do under reconciliation. In this case, it's the Senate pay-as-you-go rule, or pay-go for short, which essentially says that when you if you blow a hole in the deficit like this by repealing the Conrad rule, and you make that possible, and then you go ahead and do it and give instructions to blow a hole in the deficit and into the debt, that still has a cost. And the Senate pay-go rules say those have to be offset at some point. And because we understand that the Senate and Congress in general is particularly bad at owning up to such things and making such cuts, the cuts will basically be imposed almost automatically in the future. And so what this whole thing then means, this is how this came about. Okay, you want to cut taxes so much that you blow a $1.5 trillion hole in the debt. Well, you're going to have to bring that back with mandatory spending cuts elsewhere. And that likely will mean that they'll come out of the social safety net. Those are the only things that Republicans would be likely to allow them to come out of anyway. And they're going to be basically, it's almost like sequestration. I would analogize to it that way. These cuts are going to be required. They're not going to be affirmatively made and affirmatively decided on, I don't think, at any point. It's just the pay-go rules will demand that $1.5 trillion come out of something, and all the biggest discretionary spending accounts out there, plus the biggest mandatory spending accounts out there, are social safety net programs. And so that's where the $1.5 trillion is going to end up coming from. It's going to hit poor folks twice, not only raising their taxes outright, but eliminating the social safety net that keeps them afloat. So I guess let's not lose track of that one, but we'll have a more detailed discussion about that perhaps in the future. So I don't know whether that actually succeeds in clearing anything up or not, but that's where you can go to help clarify some of this. You should be looking at the difference between the Byrd rule and the Conrad rule, what happened to the Conrad rule, and really I would say the lesson to take away from this, historically speaking, is that Democrats designed the Budget Act and reconciliation to be a disciplinary tool, and Republicans routinely use it and change the rules so that they can continue to use it as an excuse to go hog wild and ruin everything. And I really just couldn't tell you why people believe the opposite. It's just, I don't know, pervasive propaganda, and it's just out there, and people continue to use it and share it that way, and it's not right or correct or productive. I don't know. I mean, that's sad, but I can't put my finger on any one thing that makes it happen. But I think we all have a generalized sense of how it gets perpetuated. And gosh, I wish it wouldn't be like that. Gulp. I know that doesn't really reassure anybody. But anyway, well, we'll return to this topic tangentially and a couple of others to wrap up today's program and the week's programming after we take our third and final break. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show. We're into our last segment. We need like another one of these 30-hour shows in order to get everything in there. I teased you earlier, and maybe you were relieved I didn't end up reading you the Daily 202. But I think this is a nice transition out of where we just were. In pursuit of a tax bill, Trump's GOP keeps violating more governing norms, says James Hohman, who put this article together for the Washington Post. Here you go. The big idea. President Trump's tax cuts may not have stalled on the Senate floor last night if Republican leaders had followed regular order and the White House had shown more respect for the traditional legislative process. I don't know. It might have stalled anyway because apparently people who were used to having a colorable claim to being deficit hawks were upset with having to surrender that cloak. So I don't know whether regular order would have helped them with it or not, but it certainly didn't make anything easy. Anyway, here's the state of play, he says. Senate leadership, who had hoped to vote to pass the $1.5 trillion tax bill by late Thursday night, instead sent lawmakers home and began to search for a new way to offset the cost of the legislation. Per Erica Werner, Mike DeBonis, and Damian Paletta, I guess, who were writing for the Washington Post on this subject last night. They are looking to win the support of several senators, including Bob Corker of Tennessee, who has led a small group of colleagues in demanding that the bill not drive up the nation's debt, parentheses, too much. The Senate parliamentarian ruled that a Corker-backed proposal to automatically raise taxes in the future if Republicans' expectations of higher growth did not materialize and was not consistent, that trigger, in other words, was not consistent with Senate rules. Although most of the Republicans would have been happy to move on and pass the bill, Corker stood his ground and demanded a solution. He is joined by Jeff Flake in insisting the bill not drive up the deficit. Well, don't know if it'll matter if it's just two of them. The dynamics of the Senate would mean it's a 50-50 vote, and Vice President Mike Pence would just say yes, and so 2 means nothing. 3 means something. The Senate debate is now likely to continue into Friday night at the earliest. Bigger picture, this latest Donnybrook, and it's just a Donnybrook, $1.5 trillion Donnybrook, but okay, highlights several, also, by the way, it also turns upside down all of the understandings of the prevailing ideologies of the two major parties in the United States. But other than that, it's a Donnybrook. And it highlights several problematic elements of the process that has been pursued to this point and exposes some of the political headaches that may come back to haunt Republicans, assuming they find the votes. It's political headache. The premise of your party is wrong. Oh, my head. In this age of disruption, here are 6 violations of traditional governing norms that we've witnessed during the tax debate. I don't know if any of them are standing the ideology of the Republican Party on its head, and it certainly probably doesn't include America coming to the realization that our understanding of where the parties stand with respect to fiscal discipline is backwards and an intentional lie. But I'll be happily surprised if it's one of the 6. Let's see. 1, the Treasury Department still has not released a formal estimate of how the tax code overhaul will impact the economy, despite repeatedly promising to do so. That was a big story yesterday. Congress's nonpartisan scorekeeper, the Joint Committee on Taxation, announced yesterday that the Senate GOP tax plan would add $1 trillion to the deficit even after accounting for the positive impact of economic growth. There's some detail. I'll move on. I'll stick to the bold stuff. The Joint Committee on Taxation, JCT, numbers drew fresh attention to the fact that the Trump administration has never followed through on its commitment to release an analysis to back up its claims that these tax cuts will pay for themselves. Steve Mnuchin, Treasury Secretary, has said repeatedly that over 100 people on his staff are working around the clock on running scenarios for us. Alan Rappaport notes in the New York Times, Mr. Mnuchin has promised that Treasury will release its analysis in full, but those inside the Treasury Office of Tax Policy, which Mr. Mnuchin has credited with running the models, say they have been largely shut out of the process and are not working on the type of detailed analysis he has mentioned. We learned that yesterday. The Treasury Inspector General announced yesterday that he will open an inquiry into whether Mnuchin has tried to hide the department's analysis. In other words, I guess the Inspector General thinks maybe they did run the analysis and that's why they said they were working on it, and then they found out none of it works, and then they just buried it. But there's also suspicion that they just said they were doing an analysis so that we would all say, guys in suits say an analysis is happening, let's move forward. And I think that might be what happened. Rich Delmar, counsel to the Inspector General, told the Los Angeles Times that getting to the bottom of whether or not there's a secret report will be a top priority. Who's working on it, of course? You know the answer, top men. For perspective, the national debt grew to over $20 trillion for the first time ever this fall. And who was president this fall? Anybody know? Even if the tax bill does pass, this year's budget deficit is already more than $600 billion. Goldman Sachs, for its part, sounded the alarm Thursday. Who cares? In a note to clients that the national debt is on track to hit unsustainable levels in coming years. Of course, no alarm that the temperatures are on track to hit unsustainable levels in coming years, but who cares about that? The Wall Street Bank noted that America's debt is already at its highest level since 1950 as a fraction of the economy. The tax reform bill and spending increases that are making their way through Congress should increase the deficit further, raising it from 3.2% of GDP in 2016 to 5.1% in 2021 after Trump quits, loses, dies, what have you. Number 2 on the list. The lack of meaningful committee hearings to scrutinize the draft legislation means flaws and problems won't become totally clear until after it takes effect. And I'm not even sure when it's supposed to take effect, by the way. At which point it will become much harder to grapple with unintended consequences. A handful of negotiators designed this bill almost entirely behind closed doors, and specifics were closely held secrets until the home stretch. GOP leaders are now trying to rush it through before opponents have a time to mobilize against it. Schoolhouse Rock, this is not. A lot of the current hang-ups from people like Corker and Johnson might have been dealt with in committee, but maybe not. Instead, most of the senators who plan to vote for the biggest overhaul of the tax code in 30 years, and I even dispute that, still don't seem to have a super clear sense of exactly what it would do. The biggest motivating factor is desperation for a political victory, not any sort of actual plan for doing anything, I would add at that. And it does go on from here, but I'll let you read it for yourself. By the way, I do dispute that it's the biggest overhaul in tax code in 30 years. And you should be, by the way, prepared next April to say, what happened to my being able to file on a postcard? Because that ain't happening either. The U.S. tax system is a complex, jury-rigged contraption. Greg Ip explains in the Wall Street Journal. At the best of times, tampering with any part invariably triggers collateral consequences. Those risks are magnified now by Republicans' determination to pass the plan with minimal hearings on party lines by Christmas. The bills, as they stand, contain countless incentives for gamesmanship. That which we've been able to see, anyway, tells us this thing is a piece of crap. No doubt about it. There are, he says, more ticking time bombs in this bill than a Roadrunner cartoon. Martin Sullivan, chief economist for the nonprofit group Tax Analysts, had to say. Number 3 on the list. Previous tax cuts have passed with crossover support. This is not a bipartisan effort. Democrats offered an amendment last night to return the bill to committee, and it went down to a 52 to 48 party line vote. Frankly, it would not have been hard for Republican negotiators to design true tax reform that could have gotten the support of moderates like West Virginia's Joe Manchin. But Republicans made a strategic decision to spurn Democrats so that they could make the package more ideologically conservative and tilt it further toward helping big corporations and the richest 1% of Americans. There are several precedents. In 1986, when Ronald Reagan completed the largest overhaul of the tax code in a generation, it passed the Democratic-controlled House by a voice vote and the Senate by a vote of 97-3. This happened because the Reagan administration negotiated in good faith with Democrats like then Senator Bill Bradley and then Representative Dan Rostenkowski. Pass on the Rostenkowski comments. 8 Senate Democrats voted for the tax cuts signed into law by George W. Bush in 2001. Using the reconciliation process ensured that Republicans wouldn't have to rely on Democrats. They can just pass the bill with just 50 votes instead of 60, but it curtails what the measure can accomplish and prevents it from being permanent. That we discussed just a few moments ago. Relying on reconciliation amplifies the partisanship that drives its use in the first place. Sarah Binder explained to us yesterday, as Greg read that to us, right? And reconciliation spotlights cleavages within the majority party, making it harder to blame the opposition for legislative failure, as we saw with the healthcare vote. To Binder's point, Trump this morning is on Twitter trying to blame Democrats when everyone watching this sees that it is recalcitrant Republicans holding up the bill. Number 4 on the list, many Republican politicians are not being forthright with their constituents, that some in the middle class are going to see their taxes go up under this bill, and I would say probably most. They continue to insist on television and elsewhere that everyone is going to benefit, and that's just not the case. The new JCT report finds that only 44% of taxpayers would see their bills reduced by more than $500 in 2019 under the Senate plan. Overall, the majority of Americans, 62%, would get a tax cut of at least $100 in 2019, according to JCT. And by the way, recall that the term taxpayers means those with positive obligation to the IRS, those who are at or near the poverty line or who simply don't make enough after standard deductions to owe any positive taxes aren't included in that number, though they are taxpayers. Anyway, you can take it to the bank, this section concludes, that this statistic will appear in attack ads against Republicans who vote for the bill. By 2027, people making $40,000 to $50,000 would pay a combined $5.3 billion more in taxes, while the group earning $1 million or more would get a $5.8 billion cut. It's almost a direct correlation. Number 5 on the list, Trump has not released his tax returns, so we cannot fully assess how much this legislation will personally enrich him. Breaking with bipartisan tradition that dates back more than 40 years, he hasn't given us his taxes. Trump has repeatedly insisted this tax bill would actually hurt him. It won't. If anyone believes this line, we have a bridge in Brooklyn available for them, writes Glenn Kessler, director of Washington Post's fact-checking unit. Anyway, you have heard lots about this, but we'll skip down to this part. When you add it up, Trump would have saved as much as $42 million on his 2005 taxes under the House bill and $35.1 million under the current Senate bill. A big part of that savings is the elimination of the alternative minimum tax. And remember what that is. That is a tax that's supposed to say, look, if you're rich enough that you should be paying millions and millions of dollars in taxes, but have hired enough accountants and attorneys so that you're paying near zero, we think that's bull. And you know, here's the rule. You're just going to have to pay us this percent, period, and no more hiding from it. That's fair. And of course, they're killing it. Number 6, finally, on the list here. Breaking with history, Republicans are trying to pass massive tax cuts when the economy does not need a stimulus. Republicans are looking to grow the debt by $1 trillion, really $1.5 trillion, to cut taxes at a moment when the economy is already growing and grew at 3.3% in the third quarter, and the unemployment rate is down to 4.1%. Stocks hit record highs Thursday as the Dow Jones closed above 24,000 for the first time ever. And of course, Trump is tweeting gleefully about it. They love it. I'm doing everything right. The stock market is breaking all the records. Put that together with what CEOs are telling you they're going to do with the tax cut to figure that out, right? The Republicans say corporations are going to use their corporate tax cut to raise employee wages, and that's never going to happen. That's just stupid. Everybody knows that doesn't happen. When corporations get windfalls, they keep the money for themselves. One thing, though, that's different from what they usually do, when corporations pull tricks and cut costs or whatever, it usually ends up at least partially going to executive compensation, because the person who comes up with the financialization plan that makes it possible to save $1 billion says, I won't tell you what my plan is unless you give me 10% of it in my bonus. Then they say, we still get 90%. Sure. So yes, 10% goes to the bonus, and that's ludicrous, and it's highway robbery, like literally actual robbery, except maybe for the highway part. At least the corporation is able to say, well, then there's still 90% for us to play with. Now, I might take 10% for my own bonus for approving the bonus for you, but some portion of this will be come back to the company. And what do we usually do with it? Well, if there's no capital projects that we're working on, we'll find something else to do with it. It's never I'm giving it away in wages, though. That's just crazy. What usually ends up happening is you say, well, let's keep the shareholders happy. I'm going to take $1 million bonus. He's going to take $1 million bonus. The shareholders are going to get angry if all the bonuses go to us, even though we also are shareholders, thanks to the genius plan of Gordon Gekko that converted the board of directors and the top level executive suites into stockholders because they needed to, incentivize themselves to do right by the company. But then it also meant, giant paydays for me. So that's good. Some of the other shareholders are not directors of this company, and they'll get some money, and good. I mean, shareholders are supposed to get some money. But if you're wondering, why is it that the worst possible proposal for tax reform is getting the wild approval of Wall Street, if they are supposed to be our arbiters of what's good for the economy? Well, everything's been decoupled here. Usually they're arbiters of what's good for the economy because when the stock market does well, the economy does well. And when the economy does well, we all do well. But we've decoupled all of us outside of the 1% from this performance chain, essentially. Why do they still think it's a good idea? Because all the CEOs, when you ask them, well, what are you going to do with this tax windfall? They say, we'll probably increase our dividend and give it back to, some of us will increase our own compensation. Sure, no doubt about that, though we won't name it a performance bonus because even that is too ludicrous even for us. But if we give it away to stockholders, well, what's that going to do to stock prices? People are going to say, time to buy stocks. This new plan is going to pass, and it's going to throw billions of dollars at corporations, and corporations say, I don't know if I should believe it or not, but right now they say they're going to pass that on to stockholders by way of dividends. So buy stocks. So more people buy stocks, prices go up, index goes up. Easy enough, right? Anyway, this sixth point in the Daily 202 is summed up this way. In a little notice development, recent economic data indicated that the economy has actually finally reached its potential capacity. We're at peak economy, I guess. Andrew Van Dam explained that on the Wonk blog. For the first time since the end of 2007, the economy, measured as gross domestic product, is at its theoretical potential. Potential GDP tells us in rough terms how big the economy can be. The CBO combines estimates of the country's labor potential, how many people are working or looking for work, and how many hours a week people are working, with estimates of the nation's capacity to produce goods and provide services. The good news is this means we've come a long way since the recession, but it's unlikely that that pace can be sustained, and because there's not much more room to grow, the ambitions of President Trump and Republicans in Congress carry some big risks. In other words, There's nowhere to go but down, essentially. Note that the last 3 times the economy ran above potential, it was followed by a recession. That's why, in a survey conducted by the University of Chicago's Initiative on Global Markets, just 1 of 38 experts agreed GDP would be substantially higher under the proposed tax plans than under the status quo, all else being equal. If Republicans are right that lower rates will lead to faster economic growth, it will also be a rise in inflation, which should force the Federal Reserve to hike interest rates at a faster pace. I'm not in favor of tax stimulus at the current time because the economy doesn't really need it, New York Fed President William Dudley said in a forum this week, according to Reuters. Another intra-party flashpoint, which will come to the forefront today, centers around the corporate tax rate. A handful of Republicans are pushing for changes. In other words, raising or increasing the slashing, I guess I should say, and giving away even more. Although there are a few people who want to back off just a tad. Senator Johnson appears to be a holdout here because of his concern that the bill does not do enough for pass-through businesses like plastics manufacturers that he partly owns. He wants the rate to go to 22% rather than 20%, so that it can take effect immediately. I don't really know exactly why it would take effect immediately, or I guess that's the bargain. If we cut the rate less, then we can do it sooner. I guess that speaks to the question of when does this thing take effect. Anyway, that about sums it up. There's a little bit here about where Marco Rubio, Mike Lee, and Susan Collins are on all this stuff, but quite frankly, the reason that I wanted to use this article to transition out of this, between the repeal of the Conrad rule and the usage that it enables of using reconciliation to increase the deficit, and the elimination of, all sorts of other governing norms in terms of how you move a bill like this through Congress. I guess I wanted to sort of throw that out there for your consideration in the even larger big picture item of what would Republicans be willing to do and what might they not be willing to do in order to get their way on this bill or any other that they may want to consider. And here's a good question for you too. If this bill were to fail, and reminder that this piece of crap is being considered despite all of the advice against it because of the desire for a political win, the desperation for a political win, particularly following the defeat of the Obamacare repeal bill. If this bill also were to go down, what other barriers might they try to bulldoze in order to achieve the big win that they still think they need? You should be thinking about this in the context of, would Republicans ever finally get rid of the legislative filibuster? And I guess while there were doubters about that out there, even probably among listeners of the show, we've eliminated every other barrier to doing the right thing, or every other barrier that forced people to do the right thing, even if for the wrong reasons, up to this point. So yeah, I would think probably that the legislative filibuster isn't long for this world, if there's anything left that they think they even want to try to do. It might just be that the legislative filibuster survives because this is it. This is the end of their ideas. And frankly, if they don't pass anything after this passes, well, what the hell, we're all doomed anyway. So let's just go our merry way. And I don't know why anybody would think this, but maybe not totally eliminating the filibuster can be pointed to as a thing that was good. I don't know. And I don't think anybody's going to care about that. But there would just be no reason to cause any further controversy. They might just say, let's just lay low and see how badly we get slaughtered. And that's it. And thinking about this and thinking about the court packing schemes that are underway, and we haven't really discussed some of those that are out there looming. The question of, for instance, people who would look back and say, should we have eliminated the filibuster on nominations as Democrats did it, other than the Supreme Court when we did it? And it's hard to say an overwhelming, rousing, yeah, it was awesome, but it really actually was a pretty good decision. Even if Republicans get to use it to pack the courts for generations to come, they will use that. The one thing is, I told you when we were considering this and people said, well, we won't always control the Senate. In fact, we might not control the Senate beginning next year. That's true. And it is likely that Republicans would abuse this. But to see what they're doing with this tax bill and conclude they wouldn't have simply eliminated the filibuster on those nominations themselves once they gained control of all three, of both houses of Congress and the White House, I don't think there's anybody who could possibly believe that that was true anymore. And so if you're going to evaluate it in that light, or in any light, you gotta, one, acknowledge they absolutely would have done this themselves. We just saw them do it for the Supreme Court. So, it's not just because we did it first. This was their idea to begin with. Don't forget that. The constitutional option was their design. Anyway, secondly, one, they would have done it themselves. And two, evidence for that in the bulldozing of every other governing norm, including the Conrad rule, should be part of that calculus. And I guess also, please remember that there were 100 or so judges that got to be seated under the Obama administration before losing control of the Senate and then finally the White House as well. So there's 100 seats that won't be filled by Donald Trump. And that's a pittance compared to what he could be doing in the future and plans to do in the future, including the possibility of, I have seen floated out there, a bill to eliminate administrative law judges. And I have no time to explain to you what they are, but they are actually sort of a subset of federal judges that deals only with some very esoteric issues of administrative law within departments, discrete departments, and they are not lifetime appointments. But a plan to eliminate them entirely and replace them with lifetime appointment federal judges in a special court that would focus on administrative law so that it doesn't go untended. But that would create another 400 or 500 federal judgeships that could be filled for life, provided, of course, Donald Trump has any idea whatsoever who to put in those slots. And that's a big question mark. But we've seen they have no hesitancy to put paranormal investigators / ghost hunters in those seats either. So that's a big problem. But 100 judges is a pittance, I guess, compared to what you could do if you are willing to restructure the judiciary that way. But it's 100 judges that are there who wouldn't otherwise be. In other words, not eliminating the filibuster would have meant appointing none of those judges and sitting on our hands and only waiting to be bulldozed by Trump and the Republicans a few years later, at which point we should have said, dang it, we should have done it. So reassure yourself that way. There's a million more stories out there in, I guess what we call the naked country, and we didn't describe most of them. And as it turns out, more of the country, though, is naked on a daily basis than we ever thought was going to be necessary, unfortunately. So we didn't get back to any of those stories today, even though they still loom out there. The tax bill really is going to be dominating the news cycle for the day. Who knows what the president does with the weekend? Who knows whether the Mike Flynn allocution changes anything? Much more looming out there about Trump, Russia. I'm glad we got a chance to discuss that article about some of I'm sure they'll be portraying themselves as victims of heartless Russian propaganda. Drudge Report and Sean Hannity. But I'm glad we got that one on the record as well. Oops, wrong music, amazingly enough. We need this music. The other music is the stuff we play when we're going to come back. This is the music we play when we say we're done for the day. All right. Let's see what else is out there well, who knows what we can get to by Monday. Oh, the whole world may have changed by that point. Thank you for sticking with us through some of the dry points about this. I hope we were able to explain to you in some way that was understandable why everything you used to think you knew about reconciliation was upside down. And hopefully you can take some time to digest that over the weekend. If not, or if you are looking for a continued diet of
more top-of-the-news headlines. Never fear, because, of course, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is now open. Justice will take you through the latest stories, including Roy Moore co-authored a textbook and academic course that argued women are not morally suited for public office. That's going to go over huge with the governor down there. Texas appears to concede a voting rights court case on its restrictive language interpreter rules. And French leader Emmanuel Macron announces that EU states will take part in a military operation to end slave trafficking in Libya. That's good news. After the break, they move on to discussion of what? Let's see. How about a discussion about whether the most controversial Russia expert in America is Putin's American apologist?
Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
How do you like that for a premise? Is Russia's expert, most controversial Russia expert in America, Putin's American apologist, or simply a dupe? Regardless, friend and critics alike ask the same question: what the hell happened to Stephen F. Cohen? All that and more on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam. Bon appetit. We'll see you next week.